Hyperdriive Agile, and we've been leading this Lunch and Learn meetup for a number of years. So I think we're coming up, we might be coming up to our 7, 8, 9, 10-year anniversary at sometime soon, but we're not counting. And we get an opportunity from time to time to meet with some awesome people. And one of our speakers here, who has been actively participating in our local events in Silicon Valley and quite honestly across North America, has been Ian Maple. And Ian has joined us originally from Intuit, where he was the head of agility at Intuit, and he has progressed moving upwards and onwards to Workday, and he's head of agility at Workday. Who has been sponsoring back in the old days our Tri-Valley meetup for a number of years. So thanks to Workday for just being a great supporter of Hyperdriive and of our meetup. So and joining with Ian, we have Alan Eustace. So just quick introductions. They're going to introduce themselves, but Ian, he's been doing this number of years, as I mentioned, and he's got a great approach to Agile. And as you can see from his title, it is head of agility, not head of Agile, which makes it all the more interesting. And Alan, who you'll meet, not only does he speak multiple languages, he's also got a background in agility. Again, not Agile, but agility. Now, this should have you curious based off of today's talk title. So hopefully that's enough to get you guys started. Welcome, Ian. Welcome, Alan.
Thanks, Stacey.
Thanks, Stacey.
Are we good to go?
I think we're good to go. Let's get started.
I feel like you were saying all these nice things about me. I should just like shut up for another 20 minutes and just let you keep going. So
I could.
Right,
I could.
Appreciate it. Yeah, let me make sure this shares okay. You can see that okay? Cool. All right, so welcome to this session. I'm really excited to be here with Alan and share our sort of general approach to agility at Workday and the way that we try and deliver what teams and leaders really want. And really, as you'll see, using this phrase, can you rephrase that without using the word agile, is pretty key to how we approach that. So maybe to kick that off, for those of you who are a bit confused as to which one is which, I'm Ian Maple. I am the head of agility at Workday, as Stacey just called out. I have a bit of an accent. That's because although I am based here in the Bay Area, I'm originally down from New Zealand. You can also refer to me as not the good looking one. So whatever works for you. I'll let Alan introduce himself as well.
Thanks, Ian. Hi, everyone. So I'm Alan Eustace. My title is Principal Agility Leader at Workday. I don't have a funny accent, and that's because I'm originally from Dublin, Ireland. And if Ian's not the good-looking one, I'm going to claim the good-looking one. It seems like it's an open spot, so I'm just going to grab that and run with it.
Awesome. All right, so we'll hear obviously more from Alan a little later, but let me kick it off and kick it off with something really simple and a little bit of interaction from you all. We're going to ask you a very simple question, and we're going to ask you to drop that into the Zoom chat. And that question is, what is Agile? If you could just quickly tell me the answer to that question, that'd be awesome. And you know, think about the sorts of things that you've heard from people. What have you heard when they've answered that question? And I'm just going to realize that I may have lost access to my chat here. All right. Mindset and values. Yep, absolutely. Mindset being fast. More often than not, it's BS. Yep. Incremental improvement, a framework, not a process. Growth. Feel free to drop in some of those like almost humorous responses when you've asked people that question. Yeah. We do daily stand-ups, so we're doing Agile. Man, it's surprising how many times I've heard that response. Yeah, absolutely. Not waterfall, Jira. Somebody used the term, I'm a Jira jockey the other day when I was talking to them. Yeah, Look, many organizations are bright, shiny object. Yeah, look, what you can sort of take away from all of these responses is when we ask that question, and it has become somewhat of a loaded question over time as to what do people think this thing called Agile is. It's got some baggage with it now, and we get this sort of massive variety of responses in terms of anything from, yeah, it's just some daily stand-up, all the way through to that it's a complete mindset and a bunch of principles and whatever it is that you think it should be. And this is really a problem when we get this kind of question. We get these teams that come to us and leaders that come to us and say, hey, and can you please come and make us agile? And sometimes they don't use the word please, but what do we do with that if we don't really have a common understanding of what agile is? And as you can see, when you see this wide variety of answers, this comment that my boss made to me a couple of years ago was, wow, like agile can potentially cover everything in the company. And what do we do with that? How do we focus our energies and our resources? And this is a big problem for us, right? And so this is what we're going to talk about today, and talking about how we try to focus and how we structure our approaches to agile and agility. So how do we focus? Well, at Workday, we are going to talk about some dimensions, but we thought rather than talking about what is Agile, let's use this phrase of what it is not. Agile is not just a 2-week process for a team of software developers, right? So you want to make sure that we're sort of unpacking that, and we'll link this back to our dimensions. So we're going to talk about several dimensions here, these 5 dimensions, and that leads us to this Workday Agility product. The first one that we want to talk about is Agile is not just a process. It is not even just about the Agile. What we actually want out of agility is to focus on outcomes. And at Workday, we are focused on 8 agility outcomes, right? Not 8 agile outcomes, but 8 agility outcomes. And we describe these in terms of like in a perfect Workday, we would have these teams operating at the highest levels of these efficiency and effectiveness, high-performing team outcomes. These are those. Let me briefly run through them. So the first one, exhilarated teams. Teams not just having the best time of not just doing the best work of their lives, but having the best time of their lives. These highest performing teams describe themselves almost in family-like terms, right? Exhilarated teams. At the back end of that, the users of your products or your team's output are absolutely delighted. They're not just using it, they're out there telling their friends about it and recommending your company, your products to others, right? Delighted users. Disruptive creativity is all about the team constantly being in a mode of questioning, experimentation, hypotheses, and also looking for those next highly disruptive, game-changing, jump the S-curve kind of ideas, and making that part and parcel of what they do every day. So disruptive creativity, really important. Extreme speed isn't just about getting work done fast. It's also about how quickly we can learn something. How quickly can we get feedback from the customer? The faster we do that, the faster we can pivot or ensure that we're on the right track. And so this is when we use this term speed. Quality isn't just about those functional defects in the product. Quality is encompassing everything from those common functional defects to security, to accessibility debt and defects, to tech debt, to design debt. All those elements of quality, we want to be rigorously and high standards. Trusted dependability is all about that predictability. As teams start to make commitments and forecasts and coordinate with other teams that are dependent on them, we need to make sure that has a high quality of commitment. We of course know that plan's going to change, but their ability to communicate and coordinate, especially at large enterprise scale, really, really important. Optimal flow is all about anything that is impeding or blocking any of those other outcomes. So it's a real focus on removing that waste in the process, rapid removal of impediments, that sort of thing. And then resilient sustainability is like looking at all of those other outcomes. We want them to be operating at the highest levels, and we want to be able to do that indefinitely without strain or stress. We don't want to be on this roller coaster of, oh, now our users are delighted and now they're not. Now we're fast and now we're not. We want to be kind of keep it up there. So these are what we call the agility outcomes. And this is what our whole philosophy is sort of anchored on, as you'll see. So next is Agile is not just about a team of software developers. So here we're going to talk about this idea of roles, and we use this term or this phrase. True agility requires full participation. It cannot be done with just a subset of the roles. At Workday, we have gone out and we've strived to identify some critical agility personas. Now, some of these you might recognize, like product owner, agile team, or even people leader. Some of them you may not, right? These are key roles that we've determined are critical for us to focus on in the company. Your company may have different focus roles and different ownership areas. The other thing to call out here is that these are not job titles. These are roles, and those roles are made up of responsibilities. That's what we're supporting. We need to make sure that these responsibilities are handled and supported as we engage with teams. Next one, Agile is not. This one's a little bit meta, but this is a reference to at what point do you consider yourself, quote unquote, Agile? Here we are trying to support teams regardless of where they are on the agility maturity spectrum, if you like. And we describe kind of 4 stages there. Teams start off in some sort of not agile state. They are learning and trying to move into what we call a doing agile state. Here, they're usually being quite prescriptive. They've got the Scrum guide, or they've got their baseline foundations training, and they're doing what we said in the training, and they're going through the motions just to get into the habit. Now, at some point, we hope that they are starting to realize why they are doing a daily stand-up, why they are having a sprint planning meeting or whatever it is, and they're starting to experiment and adapt and extend and optimize and try different flavors of agile and different practices. Here we see them kind of moving into what we call a being agile state. And as they're going through these states, those agility outcomes are also hopefully kind of keeping in line with that and also rising. There is an elite state here that we call beyond agile. At this beyond agile state, those agility outcomes are at the highest levels of performance. And we quite often see teams here not even using agile terms anymore. They don't need to do sprints or have a scrum master or anything like that, because they've just grown beyond that. Their ability to deliver those outcomes is absolutely rocking it, and they don't need it. Now, I will say that we don't think of a team in one of these buckets. We think of the team being in all these buckets at any one point in time. So they can exhibit not agile behaviors and some beyond agile behaviors and practices at the same time. So think of this as a sort of scatter plot of all the agile behaviors and practices that sort of anchor around one of these buckets. But we need to be able to support teams regardless of where they are on that spectrum. So let's maybe ask you that question, which is, thinking of this spectrum, where would you think your team anchors? Again, you can be in all the buckets, but what would you describe your team at being? Or if you'd like to describe your team in a different term, feel free to, to drop that in there as well. Is your team not agile? Way beyond agile? Okay, being agile, see some doing agile. What a scrum fall. Yeah, that's often a sort of trapped in that space between not agile and doing agile, or at least getting in there. Doing agile, fragile, love it. Yep. We often see that sort of fragile term describing, they're doing agile, but kind of they haven't figured out it yet, and they haven't broken through that being agile. Agile optimistic, love it. All right, cool. Pretending agile. Yeah, that's another one where, they think they are doing agile, but when you look at it, it's like they haven't quite realized why they are doing it. And, in some cases, they're just, describing it as agile, but it's not really. All right, cool. Well, thanks for sharing that. I really appreciate that. It's always useful for us to help understand the audience and where you guys are all at. So thanks for sharing. Next one is Agile is not just about a single Scrum team, all right? It is about that, but it's about more than that. And here we're talking about what we call types of Agile. And some of the, you'll be probably familiar with these terms that we're going to use here. But when we have this, what is Agile conversation, quite often people think, oh, we're talking about a 2-week sprint. We're talking about, a backlog of user stories and, daily stand-ups and things like that. And that is true. We are talking about supporting those individual Scrum teams. That's what we call team agility. Team agility. That's one type of Agile. But we also have to embrace scaled agility, or you might, prefer the term scaled Agile. This is where those teams, particularly in those larger companies, have to coordinate together and they have to deliver in complex, large-scale initiatives and get all that stuff done. So we have to support all of those various altitudes, which we'll talk about in a second, that take us up into that scaled Agile and scaled agility world. And then the third term that we use is enterprise agility, probably better known in the industry as business agility. And this is now where your entire enterprise is operating in a real agile agility mindset. And so now you've got everybody from marketing to sales to finance to HR to the C-suite are all in this sort of zone of agility, and the whole enterprise is just pumping like that. So we have to support all of those types of Agile from a Workday Agility perspective. That's type. And then associated with certainly in that scaled area is, it's not just about that 2-week altitude. We need to be able to support those altitudes that take us all the way up. And each of those 5 altitudes that we use, you might use more, you might use less, but take us through time horizons as well as a backlog of things that are getting bigger, right? Scope elements, if you like. And then there are certain events and planning and execution associated with each altitude. So down at that daily level, we have the stand up. Every 24 hours, the team's working on a backlog of tasks to get some stuff done. Then we come up into that sort of traditional Scrum altitude of the iteration or the sprint, 2 weeks, stories, experiments is actually, we'll talk more about that in terms of the design thinking element. But this is what many people think, and this is team agility typically, right? Then we come up into more of that scaled agility. We're up in that mid-range planning altitude. So that could be quarterly for your company. It could be a rolling 3 months, but something that sort of takes you a bit further out. Here, you're talking about what those stories belong to. In our case, we refer to them as epics. That's the JIRA epic, not the SAFe epic, but essentially they belong to something and they roll up, and then there are operating mechanisms or meetings that help with that. Then we come up into that typically annual altitude. Your epics then belong to something. We call them investments. You might call them something else like priorities. And then you keep on going, and we're all the way out now at that multi-year altitude, that vision altitude, whatever you call that, your strategic priorities of your organization, and then strategic planning, etc. So from an agility perspective, we have to embrace this idea that agility covers all of these altitudes, and we have to be able to support that team, that senior leadership team that's doing strategic planning, as well as that single Scrum team that's trying to do a daily stand-up. So cover all those altitudes. All right, that leads us to perhaps kind of where we want to land this thing, which is, what is this agile thing? And here we're really talking about the Workday Agility program and how we're going to respond and support all of those other dimensions. Workday Agility has this tagline. The tagline of Workday, by the way, is inspiring a brighter workday for all. We've tagged on with exceptional agility, and we're really talking about those outcomes. We want to support the company's vision, but we want to do it with exceptional agility. This obviously leads us to our vision statement. This is the vision statement of Workday Agility, our Workday Agility program. We want exceptional agility outcomes everywhere across Workday, regardless of where you are in the world, regardless of what altitude or type of team you're at. And the way that we're going to support those agility outcomes is by leaning into not just Agile, and certainly not just a single flavor of it, but all the flavors of Agile and all the scaled flavors of Agile. But we're also going to be leaning into design and design thinking methodologies and experiments and all that good stuff. And then we're also trying to embrace more of the innovation practices and principles around that. So to put that another way, we obviously want to start start with the vision of the company. If your agility is not aligned with the vision, you're going to have a bad time. We also have to align with the values of the company. These are the actual values of Workday. And yes, fun is an actual value of Workday. It's a great culture because that's at the very heart of the organizational culture. All right, then we can go back down to not the agile, not the practices, but okay, cool. What's that outcome that you're really looking for? Those are our agility outcomes. And then finally, we can come down and go, okay, let's draw from that buffet, that toolkit of practices from design and agile and innovation in support of those things and how it all kind of layers up, right? Describing it like this is a real powerful way to align with your organization. If you just come in and say, hey, we're going to do agile, it feels a little bit awkward and disjointed. All right, so these are what we call the components of the Workday Agility program. And we're going to unpack for you using a couple of examples here, how we draw these components. It's a comprehensive set of offerings that comprise the Workday Agility program. We'll get back to that in a second. Suffice it to say, we are trying to support all the outcomes, all the roles, all the maturity levels, all the types, all the altitudes, and imagine how many possible paths there are through all of those dimensions. And we don't necessarily have all of those possible tracks, solved, but we use this as a framework to guide how we build the program and deploy the program. All right. Before we can start doing any of that, we, as the Workday Agility program, have to start with a real solid foundation. And this is actually in our charter component. Every team should have a charter, including the Workday Agility program. It is where the vision and mission and our operating model kind of live. We're not going to unpack all of the offerings and all of the components here. We just don't have time for that. But what we thought we would highlight here is one of the things that's really, really important. And it goes back to the scaling challenge that we have with agility. And I don't mean scaled agile. I mean, how do we as Workday Agility scale to support the organization? So what we actually do is not take my small team and try and support 15,000 people. What we do is we have members of my team, which are agility leaders, and we then form partnerships with each of the business units. And on their side, they have an agility sponsor and agility champions. And in fact, we have a whole component around supporting champions. And I know Alida is here. She's actually leading that champion component for us. So hi, Alida. This is the way that we actually are able to scale to meet the needs of a very large organization. So here's another version of that picture. So you kind of see that each of those business units has an agility leader on my team. They partner with an agility sponsor or multiple sponsors within the business unit. And then those champions are those passionate agilists that are going to be highly trained and certified to deploy the Workday Agility program into the business unit, right? So this is kind of the way that we scale the program and support the organization. You can also see reference there to, we're not going to talk about too much about our community component here today, but you can see an example of one of those components right there. We have one of our communities is the champion community. How do we support them? How do we train them? How do we get them together and share knowledge? That's an example of what you see there. So maybe let me ask you that question, right? I just described how we scale to meet the challenge and support our organization. How is your organization supported? How is your team supported from an agile or an agility perspective? If you want to go ahead and drop, some thoughts into the chat on that. Do you have no support? Do you have a few coaches inside your company, but not centralized? Do you lean on external support? What are your thoughts on that? Or do you do something else? Okay, agile coaches in different BUs, that's a very common model that we see essentially embedded. In fact, that's what Workday used to do. We used to have sort of coaches that were recruited into the organization. We have a pool of coaches who provide coaching services to other organizations. Again, that's a pretty common model that we've seen. Yep. Support as part of PMO. Yeah, interesting. It's an interesting question as to where does agility fit? Where do your agile coaches? Which team do they belong to? Which organization do they belong to? I've been in a variety of different teams, ranging from PMO to the learning organization to whatever. And there are many different parts of the company where it might fit. One agile coach. You got to start somewhere. That's better than what many teams have, which is no agile coaches. Agile coaches and BUs, enterprise agile coaches, scrum masters at team level. Wow, that's a lot of resources, and great to see companies investing in that. Not really supported. Most of the agile transformation is siloed. Yeah, that's the sad truth is these things come to life in different ways. Partnering with organizations that really get it when you're thinking about agile transformation. I'll give a shout out to Stacey because I know he's one of the people that really gets it. Making sure that you don't just sort of do this blip of transformation, but you have a strategy for how are you going to continue that support? How are you going to leave that organization when you're done with the transformation? And now you're in that sort of support mode. Really, really important. All right, cool. Well, thanks for sharing that. Let me keep going, and I am going to sort of bring us back to this question now, which is, hey, can you please come and make us agile? And I'm going to hand off to my esteemed colleague, Alan, who's now going to sort of walk us through kind of an example on how we apply the program. So, Alan, I'll stop sharing. I'll let you jump in and hand it off.
Awesome. Thanks, Ian. Let me get sharing here. All right. And please shout if the audio is not okay. I know we were just doing some sound checking earlier. Yeah, so just taking this forward from what Ian was sharing, I want to give you a sense of how this actually plays out, because we get this question a lot. Hey, please help us be agile. Help us get this agile thing going. And we always like to turn around and say, okay, well, let's see if you can ask us that question without that agile word. And let's see if we can craft. Let's start with the problem statement. Let's come up with a problem statement that speaks to what you're really trying to achieve. What we usually get is something like this, which is basically make me agile in the form of a problem statement. As you can see here, somebody's saying they're the team agility coach for their team, which is what we call Scrum Master. They want to make their team agile, damn it, because they know it's awesome. And they realize that the team thinks agile is too much overhead. They don't get any of this. This is a really common thing. And I'm going to put my hand up and say, I've been in this role myself where I'm like, agile is the best thing since sliced bread. I want to make everybody agile, try and foist it upon them. You learn from various trial and error that that's not always successful. So when you work with somebody like this, we try to help them really sense into what's the thing they're trying to achieve, or what's the problem they're trying to solve. And we might come up with a better problem statement like this, which is a bit more specific. So they're the team agility coach for a finance team, and the outcome they're going after, they're calling it productivity. And we'll unpack, some different ways of thinking about that. And here's some things they're observing, like lots of time happening in, various events and meetings. And here's some root causes because of chaos and lack of prioritization. And they're feeling frustrated and useless. So we take this and we overlay it with the dimensions that Ian was sharing with you and start to map some of these things. So one of the things that jumps out as well, and we always start with the outcomes. And it looks like based on the outcome, they're calling it productivity. So maybe it's speed and optimal flow that they really want. So we can start to talk about that in terms of the roles that are at play here. So it's a team agility coach role, but also the team members, right? So they're trying to support a team. In terms of the maturity, it kind of looks like they're probably at the doing agile level. And this could be based on problem statement, but also obviously in conversations we'd have with them. In terms of the type, it looks like it's at that team level. As you can see, they're calling it Scrum team. And then in terms of altitudes, it's kind of at that daily and iteration altitude. And they're calling out some of those types of practices at that level. So with this in mind, and having kind of got a better understanding of what they're up to, we start to look at, well, which of our components make sense? How could we start to deploy some of these? And so we want to unpack what that might look like. And the first thing we want to do is really sit down with them and listen, like all good coaches, listen, ask a bunch of questions and really understand from them in your own words what's happening. So we have a component that wraps around that we call assess. So there's a bunch of different things we do here. One is discovery. So we want to do a lot of learning and understanding. Follow me homes, where we go and observe teams and leaders and kind of see what's actually happening. What are the dynamics looking like? We do an agility engagement intake. I'm going to give you more on what that engagement flow looks like in a moment. But basically, it's a structured way of figuring out what are the outcomes you're after, what's really happening, some of the personas, and we'll talk about that more in just a moment. We also have a team agility assessment, which is based off those agility outcomes. It's a 16-question assessment. It's a qualitative one, so it's based on team sentiment. And it's really for the teams to understand how things are going for them, but it helps us then have that conversation around the outcomes, which ones are weak, which ones are strong, and how we can help them. And based off that, we have something called a state of agility report, which is like a roll-up for executive leadership, senior leadership, which is kind of what are the systemic patterns and things we're seeing in the organization. So if we double click on this assess component just for a moment, and here's what a typical agility engagement flow looks like. And this is how we use this day to day. So we start out, of course, saying, let's drop that agile word and see what you really want and really understand, like, what's your context, what's going on. Let's figure out what are the parties at play here, and specifically, what personas are we talking about? And we'll narrow down on like at least 2 to 3 personas, and what are the problems those are trying to solve? Because whatever we come up with as a response could potentially solve for multiple personas, but we want to be sure we know who we're solving for and what's important to them. From that, we'll come up with an engagement plan. So, what are we going to do? We start the engagement, so we get into it. We start, working with the teams and leaders and partnering with them and working through that, checking in as we go. And then at the end, we want to, of course, review and celebrate. Even if things didn't go to plan, right, we'll celebrate the learning. So, we enter the engagement with some idea of where we're trying to get to. We acknowledge that, who knows how things are going to go. So we'll review and celebrate and see what we learned, and then figure out what next afterwards. So one of the things we often hear when we go through these engagements with folks is, hey, this is great, but we don't even know where to start. We don't have the skills. We don't even, we don't know Agile from, waterfall or anything else. So one of the components that really helps with that is what we call our learn and apply component. So we have a full agility curriculum. We'll give you a flavor of that in just a moment. But some of the key things on there, we have classes, so we're focused on come and learn. Now we're big fans of training from the back of the room, and all of our trainers are Agile coaches, and it's very much experiential learning. So we have those. We have workshops where we take their actual stuff, their stories, their work, their team dynamics, and work with them on those things. And we also do we have a lot of focus on trainer materials, creating train-the-trainer materials for champions and others in the organization, so that they can take some of the stuff and just deploy it for themselves or run it for themselves. They don't have to wait for us or rely on us. One of the things we're focused on right now is, so we're big fans of IC Agile, and I know they've moved on to a different graphic, but we love this one. And if you give an example, the Agile fundamentals track here in the middle. So this is something we do ourselves, and we're partnering with IC Agile. So we're in the process of certifying our training and a bunch of our instructors, so we can offer IC Agile certificates to our colleagues, what we call workmates here at Workday. And there's a couple of reasons we're doing that. One is, first of all, we're just fans of IC Agile. And we love the fact that they're framework agnostic, and our whole approach is framework agnostic. So we're not tied to any of the Agile frameworks, whether they're team level or scaled frameworks. The other thing is it really helps set the bar high. So as you all know, IC Agile has really high standards. So it helps us kind of go through that, but also signals to our organization, we're really putting some diligence and thought into how we develop this training. And then the other thing is we can offer certificates to our colleagues. So, folks who attend these trainings can get an IC Agile certificate that they can put in their LinkedIn profile. And that's also attractive to folks. So that's one of the things we're focused on. And then to give you a flavor of some of the learning options we have, and this is taken from our internal website. So we have a mixture of things like e-learning, we have in-person classes, which are all done over Zoom at the moment. We're on the cusp of moving back to in-person, and then some targeted offerings like workshops. So the introduction to Agile and Agility, you can see here, that's like a 20-minute e-learning with kind of an overview, and it's like a prerequisite to our foundations class and our team agility coaches classes, which are both delivered, instructor-led, delivered by coaches, folks who have a lot of experience in this space, and then other things where we'll work with folks on the stuff that they're trying to figure out. Other thing we wanted to talk about here is, how do we use data and how do we apply data? So when we're thinking about meeting those outcomes, like how will we even know that we're on track or off track? So we have a component around this called tools and metrics, and a couple of aspects to this. So one is we want to really apply agility to the tools that we use. So we use things like Jira and Jira Align. We actually have an expert on our team. They live and breathe the tools. So we want to offer an agility perspective on how those tools are used and configured. So they're not operating in a vacuum or a silo, and really informed by Agile thinking. We also do a lot of work on metric definitions. So we often get asked questions like, hey, how would I measure this thing? Or, should I, obvious one is, should I compare this team's velocity to that team's velocity? So we've published a lot of stuff internally around what are some metrics you might want to start with? Like how would you use those? What makes sense there? And another thing we do is publish or help teams surface some of that quantitative team data. So as you can imagine, in any big organization, there's a lot of data floating around, and sometimes it's really hard to make sense of it. So we're working on publishing dashboards. This is for teams, and this will kind of go to the last point here, for them to be able to see things about themselves, so to have ready access to that, to have it at their fingertips. And then the last one, and perhaps the most important, is we put a lot of work and thought into how we talk about metrics and how they're used. The one thing we really want to call out is this idea of not weaponizing the data or not using it against anyone. So really something to inform teams, inform leadership, but knowing that if you use metrics and data the wrong way, it can have a negative impact. So we don't want to be scared of data. We want to be empirical and use it, but also be really thoughtful and considerate about how we apply it and use it. So I want to give you an example of a problem statement with some data added to it. So if we take this one that we had before, and this is a really simple example, and this is typically how we'd frame our problem statements. We always want to figure out, like, what would success look like? Where are we now? And what would it look like when we get to success? And you can see here, we're calling out in this problem statement, current value is like 5 hours of times wasted in boring meetings or ineffective meetings. And if we could get that down close to 0, like that would be awesome. So that's one way in which sort of we track this stuff and help folks understand it. Another thing we bring in is, of course, we're huge fans of retrospecting or reflecting, just pausing to figure out, hey, how are things going and how can we improve? How can we make our lives a little bit better? And so when we do this, we bring data into this as well. And we start out with the usual, let's figure out like what's painful and what's going well. And then let's pick an outcome and pick a metric that might help with that. Then we'll figure out like what are some practices that might support that and metrics for each of those practices. And I'm going to give you an example of this in a moment, so it's a bit more concrete. It's always helpful to find others who can help. So we want to compare ourselves with others in a healthy way, just meaning there's probably teams who are doing this really well. So let's chat to them, let's learn from them, let's see what their secret sauce is. And then of course, let's go do something. So let's find some practices, get the help we need to apply those or figure out how to use them. We'll do something with it, we'll measure it. We want to make that data visible, so we can see it all the time, and then just discuss it regularly, and then rinse and repeat, figure out what to do next. So I want to give you an example of this. This is actually based on an internal project we ran, so kind of like a case study. So we had a group of teams that were really interested in improving this speed outcome. They wanted to shorten the time from when an idea was created or started working on to getting feedback, that first bit of feedback. So a couple of metrics that they were focused on. Well, one primary trailing outcome metric or lagging metric was story cycle time. So how long does it take from when a story goes from in progress to done? And for them, the average was 38.5 days, which they figured there was something they could do there. So they identified a couple of agility practices. So value stream mapping was a big one. So they wanted to try that out. And through working with that, they figured out, hey, we got a waste ratio of 40%, and they managed to drop that down to 25%, just through some basic stuff. Yourselves, just even seeing the waste, it's like, oh yeah, let's just stop doing that stuff. So that happened pretty quickly. Also, getting the stories smaller, just a basic practice, but so their average point size dropped from 5 to 3. Now, I want to be clear, this is not like there was some edict and some leader said you have to drop your point size. This is the teams themselves kind of going, okay, cool, smaller stories. We know it'll help with this, so let's figure out what we want to do there. They also use pair programming, and they wanted to experiment with that, and so spend about 50% of, or at least 50% of stories they do pair programming on, and starting to add sprint goals. So and they added those for every sprint over this time period. And what they found, and what we learned over time, was their cycle time went from 38.5 days to 3.8 days. So we're just giving an example of like starting with an outcome, some of the data and practices we'd use to help the team understand like how to get there, and then reevaluating and figuring out what the change was. Of course, when we're looking at an outcome like extreme speed, we want to, and we always work with teams on this, be thinking of those other outcomes, and we don't want to just look at this in isolation, but they would start here and then figure out, okay, cool, like what next? Maybe we're good with this, maybe there's another outcome we want to move on to, and so on. So I'm going to share with you one last problem statement, and this is kind of more leaning into that scaled level. So we have here a director who's very unhappy because they're trying to deliver on these quarterly commitments, and they're struggling. There's a lot of coordination that's not working well, bunch of defects. Also, their Scrum Master just resigned. So morale is low and nobody knows where to get help. And they're just, things are, it's not a happy picture. So this will unpack a couple of other components that might help with this particular problem statement. And if we just look at it here, some of the outcomes we're seeing are probably around like teams, quality, dependability. Looks like this is a people leader and maybe team agility coach issue. The maturity level seems to be around that doing agile level because they're talking about Scrum teams and coordinating across those. And the type here is scaled programs. It's not up into the portfolio or enterprise, but at that program level or team of teams level and the team level. And then we're looking at quarterly and iteration. So one of the top priorities here is, well, they need to fill some open positions with top talent. So we have a recruit component, and there's a couple of parts to this. So we have an agility career path, which I'm going to talk to you about in just a moment. We'll give you let you see what that looks like. And some other things like job descriptions, how to interview, some approaches on screening and interviewing and that kind of thing. I will say, advert, we are hiring. So when we flash up this agility career path, don't be a stranger if you're interested in what we're doing. So this is the career path we've been working on. And part of what drove this is we have a lot of growing interest in Agile and agility at Workday. And we were seeing more and more folks who were in that part-time team agility coach role or part-time Scrum Master role who were really interested in a career or in being full-time in this area, but they just didn't really know where to start and they didn't know what the career path looked like for them. So we really wanted to make something that was, create something that would support that kind of concern and really support the growing pool of full-time Agilists we have at Workday. So we looked at some of the industry terms and across the bottom here, and you may agree or disagree with some of these, but we're looking at some of the things we were seeing out there. We observed that around the senior Scrum Master touch point here, it sort of seems to transition over to Agile Coach, and then there's like a track around Agile Coach there. So we started out with Team Agility Coach, and sort of focusing on those at those earlier levels of the career. And at some point in the middle here, what we see internally is a bit of a pivot to Agility Leader, which is the folks on our team. And everyone on our team who's an agility leader basically means they have agile coaching skills, so all of the agile coaching competencies, but also other things like program management and content development, and really look at some of the skills that would support developing this enterprise agility program that we're in the middle of working on. So I want to say one more thing about this, but again, we have a job description up here. We have a role out there right now. So we share our LinkedIn details at the end, and don't be a stranger. We wanted to share with you why we're moving away from the Scrum Master phrase and why we embraced the phrase Team Agility Coach. So kind of what happened was we fell out of love with two words. The first word we fell out of love with was Scrum. And a couple of reasons for this. One is we're framework agnostic. So, lots of our teams use practices from Scrum, but also other approaches like Kanban and name any Agile framework our approach. So we wanted to de-emphasize Scrum. And then in terms of being master, we found that word not very helpful. I mean, because you're not really a master of the team. And some folks are interpreting that way. Okay, I've got to be the process enforcer. Or they thought they had to be the master of all things Agile or agility, which was very intimidating. And they had to be the Agile wizard. And that didn't really fit. And we're really, at Workday, we're really focused on diversity, inclusion, and equity. And we did a bunch of research and focus groups around terminology in the Agile space, and master was one that was really not popular. And so we wanted to move away from that for that reason as well. And so we embraced three different words. So the first word is team. And we all know Agile is a team sport. I think I saw Stacey saying it's a full contact team sport. I'm curious what that looks like. But we all know teams are the central entity in Agile ways of working. So we wanted to call it the team. Agility, we're all about that. We're all about the outcome, not the Agile. So really focused on agility. And then of course, this role, and for the longest time internally, before we made this official transition, we've been calling this role a coach because the skill set is much more aligned with what a coach does than being a master. So we really wanted to embrace that word. So we're quite proud because we, as far as we're aware, we're one of the first companies to officially make this pivot. And when we're advertising externally now, we're advertising for Team Agility Coaches. We'll have in parentheses, you may know this as Scrum Master, but we're really excited about it. And we're seeing a lot of really positive response to this shift. All right, want to just check in with you. We're coming up on our time here. But if you think about the folks who help your team or your set of teams with Agile, what are some of the job titles you're seeing? So we'd love to hear some of those. and we'll see what's coming in here. So let's see, TPM. So I'm guessing that's technical program manager, maybe technical program manager, Agile advocate, delivery manager, practice lead, Scrum lead. Okay, we've seen that one being used at times as well. Agile coach, Agile team facilitator, Agile coach, enterprise coach. Okay, yeah, really interesting. Okay, just engineer, tech product, Agile analyst, product owner. Very cool. So look, I'm going to hand back to Ian to take us home here because I know we're coming up on the top of our time. So Ian, I'll pass back over to you.
Ian's got to find his Zoom window. All right, so yeah, maybe lastly but not least, Alan, I'll leave you in control of the slides here. We do have one other component here, which is the share component. When we talk about share, we're really talking about how we share internally and externally. And if you haven't already guessed, what we're doing here right now is part of what we frame as the share component. And if you, Alan, if you want to jump to the next one, thanks for me. Not only are we interested in getting out there and sharing with the industry and sharing with you all, what the kinds of things that we're doing, but we're also looking to learn. We want to learn from you and learn from others that can help with our internal efforts. So you'll see us hopefully do more of these sorts of things and at some point in the future, but we're also looking for what we can learn from others. And if there was a reference there on the previous slide about external speakers, bringing that in, and we certainly want to do that. So if you'd like to come and do that, let us know. Let's wrap it up with, here's the bottom line. Look, if you're thinking, oh yeah, this is some interesting stuff here, even if you are just one person trying to support Agile in your company, we strongly encourage you to have a brand around that. We haven't really talked about the importance of the brand, but Workday Agility as a brand is a powerful way to start a conversation and take that loaded baggage term of Agile off the table, right? You don't have to use that term agility, but use some sort of branding and then build from that brand into your own vision and charter and what that looks like. So when you go in and start conveying messages to leaders or to engaging with them, you've got this sort of powerful way to sort of anchor it. Following on from that, what do your components look like? What is your product that you are offering the organization, and how are you going to structure it? You don't necessarily have to build it all out and make it all perfect before you deploy it, but at least you have that scaffold to build within and have a structure, and that comes across as a very high quality, consistent, sellable product, if you like, to teams. Next one, don't be afraid of that data. Quite often we've heard of, this sort of like, oh, Agile's too wishy-washy, and, I came in with some coaching and, they just said, did we feel good? And like, yeah, okay, cool. That's one NPS score type metric. But yeah, as you can see, look for how you can engage data. It's a very powerful way to have conversations with teams and leaders, and make sure that you're leaning back into what Alan was talking about, is that data is to be used by the teams, not on the teams as a weapon, right? So make sure that data is emerging in healthy ways that is helping the teams. Next one, real true bottom line here is, don't think about Agile. Think about what Agile can deliver for you. And that is, in our case, that agility, those agility outcomes. We're always going to start there. And we're always going to, as you saw, start with that phrase. Can you rephrase that without using the word Agile? I know you want Agile, but why? What is it that you're actually hoping to get out of it? That is probably the most powerful thing that you can do in all of this. With that, I would say that if you're interested in setting all this stuff up, I know Hyperdriive and Stacey is amazing at this sort of thing, so feel free to reach out to them if you'd like help with that. But we'll also throw it open to any questions.
Thank you,
Feel free to contact us on LinkedIn.